Good evening, everyone. My name is Mark Cantor. I'm the president of the Jewish Heritage Center of Western Canada. Excuse me for just a moment. As the president, of course, I'd like to welcome all of you to this wonderful program this evening. I would like to acknowledge that the Jewish Heritage Center of Western Canada is located on ancestral lands on Treaty 1 territory. The Red River Valley is also the birthplace of the Métis. We acknowledge the water in the museum is sourced from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation. I promise you I'm going to be very brief. Just a few words about the Jewish Heritage Center. The vision of the Jewish Heritage Center of Western Canada is to forward a pathway to the future by preserving and sharing compelling stories and educating the present and future generations. I strongly believe the Jewish Post is a pivotal force in this endeavor. And as a result, I'm very excited about this evening's program. I'm very much looking forward to the conversation this evening. I'm now going to introduce you to Daniel Stone. Daniel is Professor Emeritus of History at the University of Winnipeg, where he taught East European and Holocaust history. He is past president of the Jewish Heritage Center of Western Canada and is presently the chair of our programs committee. Dan?
Thank you very much, Mark. Mark has underlined the importance of newspapers, which we all certainly acknowledge. If it weren't for newspapers, we wouldn't have any idea. We wouldn't have much of an idea of what was going on, and we would not really get much information about what was going on a little bit under the surface. As a longtime professional historian, it's also emphasized the importance of newspapers to the understanding the past. If it's hard to understand what's going on at the present without newspapers, it's impossible to understand what even a few years ago. And when you look at things that happened 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, I found in my work, as many other people have, that the Jewish Post and a variety of other newspapers from Winnipeg and elsewhere are absolutely necessary. Newspapers, as you know, are frequently failing, and many of Jewish newspapers throughout North America have gone under. But the Jewish Post and News is doing well. It's kept going, it keeps us informed, and it looks as if it will keep going, we hope, for a very long time. So that's one of the issues that I'm sure will come up today in the conversation between Bernie Bellen, the editor of the paper, and Jerry Postner. Let's call him a liaison between the Heritage Center and the Jewish Post, both of which he's been involved in for a long time. Just a quick word about the order. Finish my introductions, then you'll have a conversation between Jerry and Bernie on this and many other topics. At the end of it, there'll be a time for questions and answers, which you can address to either Bernie or Jerry or both. Please submit your questions through the chat line. For most people, most computers, if you're not familiar with it, put your cursor down at the bottom. All sorts of things will spring up, among them a green button called chat. Click on it, and then on the right, you'll have a chance to write your material. Press enter and send it. Jerry will try to watch it, and I'll back him up. Now, Bernie Bellen, as you all know, otherwise you wouldn't be here, has been the co-owner of the Jewish Post and News since 1984. He had been the business manager. His brother Matt was the editor, and Gail Frankel the advertising manager. They bought the Western Jewish News in 2007 and created Jewish Post and News. Bernie took over as editor in 2008 when Matt retired, and he supplemented this activity, as if that weren't enough to do, as writer, photographer, and editorialist with these short takes. Recently, with COVID, in April 2020, he had to restructure and remanage things. He's now the owner, employer, employee. He works out of his home, and he supplements his work with getting material from freelance writers. Unlike many Jewish newspapers and other newspapers, the museum is thriving under these conditions. but he tells me he's ready to pass the paper on sometime soon to a younger, committed purchaser. And he'll be talking with Jerry Postner, who also is very well known to all of you. I'm a little embarrassing to introduce people who are so well known. You know, lawyer, community leader, and singer, columnist for the Jewish Post and News for many years. He had been president of the Jewish Museum, president of the Jewish Heritage Center after the Jewish Museum merged with the Jewish Historical Society and the Holocaust Education Center to form the Jewish Heritage Center. As president, he organized programs and events. While he's president, the Holocaust Symposium was founded by the Holocaust Education Committee. We had a big conference on radicalism, the Farm Colonies exhibit, and he personally got together on the class of 1942, what it was like to be a man growing up in Winnipeg if you were born in 42, 43. Sadly, as you know, Jerry, in 2012, and his wife left Winnipeg, chasing children and grandchildren to Toronto. Sadly, a well-known story. I remember very well the very large gathering that we had here in Winnipeg to thank Jerry for all his services and wish Jerry and Sherma well. And Jerry contributed for this, and his friends created a new archive as part of the Jewish Heritage Center, the Shmeria and Yudasha New Canadian Archive. So now you know who they are, and let's welcome Jerry Postner and Bernie Bellen for a conversation about news and the Jewish Post. Thanks.
Thanks, Dan, for that very kind introduction. It's great to be going one-on-one with Bernie, and I hope that we'll provide an evening of some enjoyment and interest for the viewing audience. Bernie, I was just listening to the introduction of you. Is it possibly true that you wear a few hats? Editor, publisher, author, photographer? Is that all so? Do you really do all that?
I do everything. I was cleaning the floors before we started, but yeah. So, well, Jerry, I count on people like you to supplement what I do. But with COVID, it really wasn't sure last April whether we were going to be able to carry on at all. There was a huge drop in advertising. And so I made the decision to do things. I had to lay off my one full-time employee, and I moved the office from the Herzliya Synagogue to my home. So yes, everything has been done under my home, under my roof here.
So, that's really quite a lot of work. You obviously still write a lot of articles, let's be clear on that. And you also are responsible for the advertising part of it. And you have to arrange for the publishing of it. And I think at one time you even delivered the paper.
That's right. For those who don't know me well, when I first started the Jewish Post, I was a letter carrier. I had been a letter carrier since 1976, and then in 1984, and we'll get into this, how I got into the Jewish Post, but I was still a letter carrier, and I remained a letter carrier all the while that I was working with the Jewish Post. So talking about wearing 2 or 3 hats. And then in 2010, even after I had become the full-time editor, I was still a letter carrier because I like to walk, which I get from my father, who was slightly eccentric, and on any occasion he would say, "I'm going for a walk." And including what?
Including his wedding night.
Oh, including his wedding night, he went for a long walk. So for my various relatives who are watching this, they would be familiar with that. But I've been doing quite a bit, and I'm used to doing it. That's one thing. Practice makes perfect, or imperfect in my case.
Well, I don't think there's too many other people who can say that they're the editor of a major newspaper or even a minor newspaper that actually can say they also have delivered the paper to their various people. That's unusual.
Well, I like to say if it's Canada Post or Jewish Post, if it had the name in it, I joined that organization.
Well, Bernie, let's just step back a bit before we go too much further. Let's go into a little bit of the history. I don't know how much you know about the history, but how old is the paper now?
Well, we were talking about this actually before we went live. Although I'd like to ask Greg at what point we do have pictures prepared, but we're sort of at the mercy of our technical aid here.
That's right.
All right. So, okay, here we are. This is the very first page of the very first Jewish Post in 1925. So the paper is now 96 years old.
Wow.
About the same age as you, Jerry, I guess.
Ooh, I love that.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll start off with a zinger, and I'll take it as good as I can give it.
You may regret that.
Okay. Oh, someone didn't like that. Okay.
So that's look at the history of that. That's 96 years, and I think that was started by a guy by the name of Ben Cohn.
Yeah, Ben Cohn, who had it for quite a long time. So I'm not the historian. There are historians in this audience.
Right.
I believe Ben Cohn had it until the 1950s.
1953.
Is that right? Anyone, Dan or?
Yes, it's 1953.
1953. So that's what, 28 years?
Yeah, about 26, 27 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it took it went through a few other owners. I think didn't Mel Fenson get involved at that time?
Yeah. Well, it was sold next to Leo Lizak, who had it. Mel Fenson was the editor. I think Mel ever had an ownership role in this paper. He had I believe in the Israelite Press, if I'm not mistaken. And Leo Lizak had it until sometime in the 1970s, I believe. And then there was two of his employees, Harold Markusoff and Bill Wong, who was the owner at the time that I got involved. So there's been a relatively few owners of the paper. Really, there's been only 4 series of owners.
How long has the Bellen family been involved?
Well, my brother, Matt, Alav Hashalom, came on in 1982. He had been a reporter for the Regina Leader Post. He was the education reporter, and he was a very good reporter. He actually had his journalism degree from Carleton. I don't have any kind of journalism degree. That's why I can proudly say that what I do is fake news. But Matt, the editor just prior to him was Martin Levin, who was there for just a very short time, a couple of years, I believe. And then he actually started his own newspaper. It was a seniors paper. And then he went to Toronto, where he became the editor, books editor of the Globe and Mail. But my brother was hired in 1982. And this is something we talked about before, his background. My brother had a rather tempestuous relationship with the owner. My brother was wont to explode at the slightest pretext. And he was fired a couple of times, brought back, and eventually my father, who liked to think that he could somehow calm him down, thought, well, we can keep him in place by buying the paper. It's like the guy who bought Remington. I liked the razor so much, I bought the company. So we bought the Jewish Post in 1984. And at the time, the advertising manager, Gail Frankel, was also involved as a partner. And then, just to jump forward, maybe, although I'm just wondering if Greg wants to, maybe we should go back in time and get some of the pictures of the people who were involved in the paper. Greg, if you hear me, if you want to put some up on the screen. Okay, this is something I sent. This is a paper from the 1950s. And this is a typical example of what the Jewish Post looked like then. If for people who can see, you can see social and personal, club notes, a lot of bar mitzvah and wedding announcements.
A mistake upside down a car.
No, that's a Mardi Gras. That's a Mardi Gras ball for Purim. And also the very well-known Reverend Karloff, who Karloff, no pun on Boris, but his picture haunted our paper for years. Like a lot of people, he never aged. He never gave us a new picture. We ran that ad for about 30 years. So Reverend Karloff, who I can proudly say I had a personal experience with as a youngster, as did my nephew Jeremy, who's watching this. We all got to know Reverend Karloff. There were other Moyles who also advertised in the Jewish Post, I discovered. But looking at this, I noticed if you zoom in there, I think there's a wedding announcement. David Kaufman announcing the birth of his daughter, Joy. Joy's a reader, so there we know the date. It was 1959, I believe. Yeah, so this was a typical page of the Jewish Post.
There was. In fact, you can see the announcement of Justice Friedman's daughter having a bat mitzvah.
Was that
Phyllis or?
Was it Phyllis?
Phyllis Friedman, yes.
Oh, Phyllis. She was your friend.
Mhm.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, if you want some history, it's sitting right in front of you. That's so that's about 1959, 1960, I think.
Yeah.
Have you got any pictures there of the people that were the movers and shakers that were the owners of the? I thought we had some pictures there.
Greg, I just have the picture order here.
Oh,
We have pictures of Mel Fenson.
yeah, right.
Greg, okay, that's Mel, who was editor and wrote a well-known column called Marginal Comment for years. Very erudite,
Right.
very literate, unlike me.
Who knows what he would say to that?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and Mel, we have a picture of Abe Arnold too, Greg.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay, well, you can probably talk about Abe a little bit, Jerry,
Abe was
the historian.
significant historian and very involved in what was then the Jewish Heritage, first the Historical Society of Western Canada and then the Jewish Heritage Center. Abe Arnold was very prominent, and he wrote, he spoke, he was key to this organization.
Yeah, I'm a longtime contributor to the paper. That's why we have his picture. I should tell a story about Abe. When I took over as editor and I decided to start writing this kind of eccentric column, which I call Short Takes, Abe would always phone me after every issue came out and say, "You got to break up your paragraphs. You're not separating your paragraphs. Put something between them." And Abe would had a deeper voice. He was, he could reprimand you nicely, but in no uncertain terms. So I started putting little stars between the various components of Short Takes. But then Abe passed on, and I thought, well, who really cares about that? He was the only one who cared, so I stopped doing it. So Abe, if you're listening, it was a good point, but I can't be bothered with that anymore.
Listen, Bernie, you mentioned this earlier, and we talked about some of the roles that you've had. How do you attribute the fact that you're able to make your paper a successful go at it when so many, even Jewish public newspapers, as in the Canadian Jewish News, for example, has failed? What is it that you're able to do that they're not?
Well, to be serious for a moment, which is unusual for me, there are two things. We have a solid subscriber base, a fairly loyal subscriber base, most of whom take the print edition, but a lot of people now have started taking the online edition. We have 150 online subscribers. And so between the two, that gives you the financial base that at least gives you the knowledge that you're going to have good cash flow. Now, the other Jewish newspapers that remain in Canada, from what I know, there are only two. There's the Vancouver Jewish Independent and the Alberta Jewish News, neither of which have a regular paid circulation. They do take subscriptions, but they don't rely on subscriptions. And to me, if we didn't have a paid circulation, I don't think we'd be continuing. The other thing that has remained incredibly steadfast are the number of obituaries and memoriams that we have. And I know that people think it's kind of an oddity. It's quaint that we have it. And I've said to people, if you ask me how we have it, I say, I don't know. How do you start a tradition? And actually, if you look back at older issues of the paper, there weren't as many obituaries and memoriams. It would maybe be half a page, a page. This week we had 4 full pages, another full page of obituaries. I don't solicit obituaries, in case people are wondering. I'm not an ambulance chaser, and I don't go to the morgue.
But it gives me a running total of who died today.
Well, no, yeah, I'll just give you for instance. Yesterday, I was getting ready to send the paper to the printer, and then I got a call about someone who had an obituary. They were from Vancouver. And I said, okay, you know what? I'm up against a bit of a deadline, but I'll call our printer and ask if we can postpone it. And I had to rejuggle, I had to rejig the paper, and I got that obituary. Then at 11:30, I got another call. And again, now, I say to people, if it doesn't go in this week, it won't go in for another 2 weeks. Would you want to wait? And they say, oh, please, can we get it in this week? And I say, okay, I'll do that. And I rejigged the paper. But at the same time, I forgot to run 3 major ads in the paper. So I was walking my dog at 6:30 at night. This shows you how daunting it can be to be carrying all these various responsibilities. And I was thinking, there's something I forgot. Then I realized I forgot 2 ads for Temple Shalom and an ad for Chapel on Funeral Home. And so I came back home, started redoing the paper, tried to contact our printer. No one was there. So I sent the page in the hope that someone would get it. I phoned early this morning. I got a hold of the guy in the press room, and I said, I sent you a page. And he said, oh, did you? And I said, is it too late? And he said, nah. Well, what they have to do is replate the paper. They hadn't started printing, and everything ended up okay. So those are it's kind of a nightmarish situation that I'm in, trying to remember everything. On top of which, today I got a call from someone saying, how come you billed me for 2 different memoriams? I only ran 1. And I thought, did I? And I checked, and sure enough, but it was her sister-in-law who I should have billed. Winnipeg is a very small community, and everyone is connected. So I phoned the sister-in-law, and I said, you know what? I should have charged you for memoriam, but I charged it to your sister-in-law instead. And instead of saying, well, she can afford it, she said, I'll pay for it. So all's well that ends well. But that's a typical day in my life.
I mean, that in memoriam, is there any other paper around that has that kind of production of in memoriams? It's staggering.
No, you can say we are unique, not the most unique, not very unique, which are all oxymorons. We are unique. I don't know that there's another newspaper in the world that has memoriams the way we do. And they're continuing to be added. This is from younger people, not all of whom are subscribers, by the way. This is one of the interesting things about Winnipeg, and we've talked about this, Jerry. You are so observant of the relationship between ex-Winnipeggers and Winnipeggers and the affection and the ties that they have for them, that people who have long since left Winnipeg want to keep their parents' pictures alive on the memoriam pages of the Jewish Post. Again, I do call people to ask them if they want to run it, but I don't ask people who I know their parents have, when someone runs an obituary, I don't say to them, hey, do you want to book a memoriam a year from now? Might be an idea, though.
I'd be curious to know what the oldest in memoriam is, how far back it goes.
Well, I just ran one that was 61 years today. So I'm not sure if I've had many that are longer than that.
That's staggering. Well, it's working. I don't want to tell people that we should keep dying away. So, but this is
Greg. Maybe if you're listening, if you can switch to a picture of Matt, my brother, and Gail Frankel. Okay, this is at the inception. This was, this must have been taken, is this in our house?
I'm looking.
I think this was in our house on Elm Street.
Yes.
Matt, well, that Matt would have been about 50 then. No, he would have been in his 40s. I would have been about 32, 33. I still have that sweatshirt. Yeah.
When was it that you guys took over the Western or Jewish News?
Western Jewish in 1987.
87. Okay. How did that happen?
Well, the Western Jewish News was for a very long time in the hands of the Korn family. It was started by a guy named Dave Berg, and then I believe it passed on to David Korn, and he handed it on to his two sons, Harold and Alvin. And they didn't really have much interest. I mean, with all due respect to the Western Jewish News, it wasn't at the same level it wasn't the same caliber as the Jewish Post. And
they had a lot of advertising.
Well, it didn't have, but they did have an advertising salesperson whose name will remain unknown, who would like to call up advertisers. And what he would do is he would run their ads in the Western Jewish News without their permission and send them a bill. And the advertisers, a lot of whom weren't familiar with the Jewish press, they thought, well, there's one Jewish paper in town. So they'd get that bill and they'd pay for it. It's like the old days of the Free Press and the Tribune stealing each other's paper boxes. There was a fair bit of skullduggery going on between the two papers, I was told. But anyway, by 1985, 86, there was a new owner of the Western Jewish News. And my brother, who was slightly paranoid, was told that the Western Jewish News was going to turn from a broadsheet, it was a long paper, to a tabloid, which we were, meaning it was about 4 inches shorter. And my brother thought, oh no, that's going to do us in. And I tried to convince him, no, Matt, it's not really going to have much effect on us. But he was convinced that the Western Jewish News was going to turn into very serious competition for us. So again, we paid a lot more than we should have, because after we acquired the Western Jewish News, we saw that its total circulation was only 800. And of that, I'm not sure how many were paid. But by merging the two papers, the thinking was that we would do things. We would build our circulation, but we would also eliminate the need for Jewish organizations to advertise in two newspapers. So they appreciated that, but they told us, if you raise your rates, all we're going to do is cut down the size of our ads, because we have a certain budget for advertising and it's not going to increase. So there you go.
Of course, there was a time, wasn't there, that the Jewish newspapers in Winnipeg, both you and the Jewish Western Jewish News, would have articles even from other Western Jewish communities, and you had advertising even from other areas.
Oh yeah, sure. Well, yeah. I mean, if you look at those papers, there were ads from every small town in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta. Western Jewish News was ostensibly claiming to serve those communities, but it didn't really. Most of the news came out of Winnipeg, but there were stringers in those communities who would send in little stories. But you have to remember, in those days, what was the news? It was community events. It was fundraising. It was pictures of men, who were all machers. And then the women would have their own sisterhoods. There was a segregation in the Jewish community back then. And so that's what the paper was made up. And then very serious reporting about Israel, about anti-Semitism, that kind of thing. But the news, the local news, whether it was from here or Regina or Lloydminster or Prince Albert, was about synagogues holding fundraisers or that sort of thing.
I noticed as going through one of the old newspapers, was a typical comment in the social column. Mrs. J. Finkelstein has just returned from a 2-week holiday in Montreal, and she arrives home and will be visiting with friends that now that she's back. I was trying to say to myself, could that find a place in the Jewish Post, the JPN today?
Sure, but it would have to be very scurrilous. It would have to be that Mrs. Finkelstein, whose husband was having an affair with her neighbor. No, I'm just kidding. The content of the newspaper has changed. By the way, if anyone's watching this and they were curious to see what old Jewish Posts looked like, both on our website, jewishpostandnews.ca, we maintain an archive, and the Jewish Heritage Center now has a fantastic archive that I believe just went up last year, where they have all the Jewish newspapers from Winnipeg digitized, where you can do a search by name or by date, and you can find references to your parents, your grandparents, or any of that sort. And you can scour the newspapers to look for the kinds of really inconsequential trivia that made up the bulk of the newspapers in those days.
Bernie, can you just talk about, if you want, some of the more difficult subjects that you've had to deal with along the way in articles? Anything you can talk about freely here?
Well, yeah, there have been various issues. I think Alan Levine touched upon it in his book, Coming of Age, History of the Jewish People of Manitoba, the Chicago Kosher scandal of the 1960s. Now, the paper reported on it. I'm not sure to what extent it got the paper into trouble. But then there was a more serious case later, and I won't mention the rabbi's name. There was a rabbi in Winnipeg who was highly controversial and whose reputation was seriously undermined by allegations that were brought forward. Myron Love, who we have a picture of Myron, Greg, if you want to post it on the screen. Oh, okay. Okay, we're actually going to go back through all those various pictures that you saw, and we'll have some comments from you too, Jerry. Myron Love did ace reporting on the scandal, and we were threatened with a lawsuit. Luckily, we managed to avoid that. The other really serious issue that got me into trouble really had nothing to do with the Jewish community per se, but we used to publish supplements that were distributed to the community at large. One was called Financial Guide, and I did an expose on something called the Crocus Fund. This was back in 1982, I wrote it, where I suggested that the Crocus Fund, which was something called the Labor-Sponsored Investment Fund, I suggested it was actually in very serious trouble and was probably not going to be able to continue. And we were threatened with a lawsuit. I was threatened with a personal lawsuit, had to spend some money to fend that off. Eventually, I believe I was vindicated when the Crocus Fund did go out of business, costing people a lot of money. But that was the second major potential lawsuit that we faced. I don't think there's been anything since, although we have made some serious mistakes over the years that could have cost us, including running memoriams for people who weren't dead. I'll mention the name because there was more than one David Friedman at the time. And what would happen is we used to have pictures that we used to have to take out of a filing cabinet and paste them up on the memoriam in the old days when the papers were all done through paste up on large sheets. And then it would be taken to a printer and they'd photograph the sheets. So my brother, who was not one to really pay much attention to the memoriams, he thought, well, this is kind of mercenary stuff, sort of beneath his station in life. He was the editor. So one day he was attending to the memoriams and he grabbed a picture of someone named David Friedman from the file. Unfortunately, that David Friedman wasn't dead. So we got a call from him when the paper came out, and he said, "You ran my picture and you said I'm dead." And he said, "It wasn't even a good picture." So there you go. He had a sense of humor about it.
Wow. Now, as I noticed that some of these pictures were going by just a minute
Yeah,
ago.
maybe Greg, if we can go back through some of the pictures, we can refer.
I noticed one of Gene Teltner. Well, there
Yeah.
he is.
Okay, well, okay, there's the picture I sent of my brother, Matt. It was hard to find, we don't have a lot of pictures of ourselves in our files. We have a picture of you, Jerry, with your baseball cap. You sent it to us. That's what we call a standing head when we use the same picture over and over. But, baseball and you, they're synonymous. But this was a good picture, my brother. And but when I was looking for pictures of him, it's hard to find. Okay, if we can go forward to the next picture. Okay, for those who don't know, this is Noach Wittmann. I assume that you knew him probably, Jerry. Jerry, you probably knew him better than I.
Not that old. I'm sorry to tell you that. I used to know that.
Okay, well, Noach was the longtime Yiddish columnist for the paper. And I'll just tell a story about Noach. The papers would go to print on Tuesdays in those days, and Noach would come in on Thursday. His wife Vera would drive him. Noach didn't drive at that time. And he would come in, having gone to Oscar's corned beef, with a rye bread and a package full of corned beef. And he would feed the staff. But I was a letter carrier, so I was working while the others ate. And Noach would proceed to tap away on one of our early Macintoshes where we had the Hebrew letters pasted up on the keys. He would tap away his Yiddish column. And that's every week for years he would do it. And we've only had 2 Yiddish columnists in the history of the paper, Noach Wittmann and Ite Zutra, who took over about 8 or 9 years ago, I believe. Maybe go to the next picture, Greg.
Yeah, Gene Teltner. He wrote for the Free Press and I think the Tribune.
Yeah, he started with the Tribune, then he went to the Free Press. And when he retired, actually, I believe Gene was retired a little bit earlier than he had wanted to be. And we approached him and asked him if he'd be interested in writing for us. And he said he'd love to. And he wrote a very popular, folksy, gossipy column that touched all the bases about Las Vegas, about his mother in Omaha, I believe. And it was the most widely read column in the paper for years. Maybe we can go to the next one, Greg. Okay. Did you know Yoram Hamizrahi, Jerry?
Yeah, I remember the name and I remember seeing him, but I didn't know.
Yoram, who was his actual role before he came to Winnipeg, he was the liaison officer between the Israeli army and the South Lebanese army, which was a Christian militia. When Israel invaded Lebanon, they had kind of acolytes, they had their own Christian militia that served in South Lebanon. Yoram HaMizrahi was the liaison with them, but he was extremely knowledgeable about Middle Eastern affairs and politics. Was an intimidating looking guy, but was the nicest guy. And he had a very good relationship with my brother. I didn't really know Yoram as well. Yoram died, sadly, he died young. And I believe he had diabetes also and lost use of his legs. But he was a terrific writer. This is going back to the 80s and 90s.
Yeah,
Okay, let's go to the next picture, Greg. Okay. All right, I'm not sure everyone would recognize all the people in the picture, but there are actually 3 famous people in this picture.
there are.
Can you identify them, Jerry?
I think that in the background, it looks like Don Whitman.
Don Whitman.
And then with Harvey Rosen, the sports writer for the.
Do you recognize the other guy?
That looks like Timo Solani.
Timo Solani.
Yeah.
So Harvey, I'll just talk a little bit. Harvey was, I think, after Myron, Myron has been writing for us for 39 years, I believe. Well, he predates me, but Harvey had also been the sports columnist for well over 30 years. And just like everyone tends to repeat themselves, Harvey had some choice phrases. And my favorite was when he referred to someone who was Jewish, he would say they were a member of the Hebraic persuasion. Just like Jerry, when you write, you say, and then there was Yiddle or something. It's people, how many times can you come up with a new opening line? Right.
That's right.
Harvey, actually, someone, I get frequent calls from people saying, why don't you have sports in the paper? Now, there are two reasons right now. There's a pandemic on, in case people didn't know. Also, there's a serious shortage of really well-known Jewish athletes. But as I wrote in my column this week, my short takes, Harvey would go up to anyone with a Jewish-sounding name in a locker room and ask if they were Jewish. And I remember, and he would tell me this, he went up to a player named Jaden Schwartz, who still plays for the St. Louis Blues, asked if he was Jewish, and the player very politely says, no, I'm not, but, without losing their temper. Harvey always wanted to find every Jewish athlete he would do, and other writers around the world will refer to Harvey Rosen's writings about Jewish athletes in pro football or Jewish hockey players. He was before Wikipedia came along, he was a one-man Wikipedia.
He's a Rosenapedia.
Yeah.
I remember that.
Is there any other picture? I'm trying to think. I think that's it for our columnists now.
Let me pose this to you, Bernie. You cover a lot of the Jewish organizations in Winnipeg, and probably, I'm going to say no more about the Jewish organization structure and the way things are going in this community. I'd say better than anybody else. I mean, is there anybody that could possibly have a handle on what's going on more than you? I defy anyone. Would I be wrong in that? I mean, you cover them all.
Well, look, it's nice to be complimented.
I don't know.
I mean, just because I've been around, there are people like Bob Friedman who actually, I did a video interview with Bob that's still accessible on our website. It's a little bit harder to find, where he told hilarious stories about, for instance, the building of the Asper campus and about the personalities involved in that, which is the major accomplishment of the Jewish community of Winnipeg, I would say, for all time. He told just some great stories about approaching various people and asking for money. And the guy would say, well, how much did so-and-so give? And Bob would say, well, he gave this amount, lying through his teeth. And the guy would say, that son of a bitch gave that much. Well, I'm going to give you 100,000. Those are typical Jewish stories. But when it comes to covering organizations, for a time, I have to admit, I've mellowed. I would look for interesting angles on organizations, so to speak. And then I realized, you know what? These are all mostly volunteer-led, as is the Jewish Heritage Center. There's no dirt I have on the Jewish Heritage Center to write about. But there are organizations that do have some bodies buried. And at times, I have written about them, but I've been sort of getting away from that as I've been getting older. I think the paper is still lively. It's not as controversial as me. Listen, I've taken, talking about Jewish organizations, if you want to get into trouble, you get accused of not being pro-Israel enough. And so that's how I get myself into trouble more often than not.
Well, I can give you another example. There seems to be a bit of a debate about what is the Jewish population of Winnipeg. Because it seems to be you against the rest of the world, at least the Jewish Federation.
Well, I'll be proven right, because the Shaare Zedek Cemetery has 19,000 graves. And I say there are a lot more Jewish people in the Shaare Zedek Cemetery than there are living people in the Jewish community. Now, that's an easy one to do, but I rely on statistics. That sets me apart from the people of the Jewish Federation who are sort of practicing voodoo. They use voodoo economics to come up with their figures, but I'll leave that for the time being, because I said I haven't been sued for a long time. So, but the actual Jewish population in Winnipeg is way smaller than people think. We punch above our weight, that's all.
That's a fact for sure. I think nobody would dispute that fact.
And you're a typical example. You keep finding ex-Jewish Winnipeggers, and you write about the Arthur Ripstein this week, and Gail Singer, Gail Jacobson.
They're here by the, I don't know. Everywhere I turn, I run into one. It seems like.
Yeah. But the fact is, there are almost as many ex-Jewish Winnipeggers in the world as there are current Jewish Winnipeggers, and that's demographically provable.
How do you think the Jewish Post has changed over the years? In what specific ways would you say it's changed since you?
If you look back, that one page from 1925. First of all, it was the papers. The business model of the Jewish Post and the Western Jewish News in the old days was to print a thin paper each week, 12 to 16 pages. And then 3 times a year, you would get a humongous volume that would serve as a paperweight. It would be 120 pages filled with every business under the sun issuing greetings in these very plain-looking ads with long, turgid articles about esoteric subjects that I'm sure no one ever read. But that was how the papers ran. And when we took over the paper, the model was much the same. The papers, and we were a weekly then. We switched in 2008. I was reminded by Stan Carboni, who did the research. I believe it was 2008. Yeah. The papers were weekly, but they were thin, and we still relied on the holiday papers. But I kept arguing that if we went to a bi-weekly and put more into each of those papers, we wouldn't lose subscribers, but we would actually gain subscribers, which we did. And although, look, the number of subscribers now is down from its peak, but that's a reflection of 2 things. One, newspaper readers are by and large older. Secondly, the Jewish community in Winnipeg is much smaller. So I don't lament the fact that our circulation is down. I just accept it as reality. But compared to other Jewish newspapers, we're thriving. But the Jewish newspaper, the Jewish Post and News now is regularly 24 pages. And if it's not 24, it's larger. Only once in the past year have I done a 16-page paper. So that's out of 26 issues. That's not bad.
It's more than not bad. It's outstanding, actually. I mean, are you satisfied with the electronic version? Like do you sort of visualize a day when this newspaper, your newspaper, will be entirely electronic?
No. Look, any Tom, Dick, and Harry can start a website, or like the Canadian Jewish News with their somewhat unusual Facebook page now. I don't know if you've seen it or anyone else has, which is a hodgepodge of news and gossip. And if Avram Rosner is watching this, I saw him before, people offering comments about news. That doesn't hold people's attention. Even our website, the average amount of time that people spend on a website is 2 minutes. So how much can you pour into a website? Now, I know that we actually have more viewers on our website than we do our newspaper, but can we get the advertising for it? No, it wouldn't sustain it. It wouldn't keep me in gravy as opposed to the print publication. So if the newspaper were ever in danger of folding, that would be it. I mean, anyone can carry on a website, but they do it more as a pastime and to supplement a print publication, but not as a full-time news publication.
Remember, this is all coming to you live from your house. I mean, this whole thing is pretty much, that's quite remarkable. Live
from New York, this is Saturday Night Live. I felt like introducing you like Jerry Seinfeld when he used to do this thing with Newman. You remember Newman? Where Newman used to say, "Hello, Jerry," and Jerry would say, "Hello, Newman." You could say, "Hello, Bellen," and I'd say, "Hello, Jerry." But I told people we were doing this, I said, don't expect me to take this too seriously. I mean, I want to keep myself amused. I generally find these Zoom sessions can leave you yawning after 40 minutes. How long have we gone? Oh, Bill, are we going to be starting to take questions yet?
Should
I don't know. All I see is Belle's picture. She might have left.
She haven't
I'm
gone.
here. It's up to you.
Yes,
I
there's,
mean,
you know, somebody wanted to
has
know,
anyone been sending questions?
is there anybody that had, somebody wanted to know who's the Calgary correspondent?
Calgary correspondent.
I don't know. At one time there used to be correspondents from different,
Oh, they were probably referring to that page that came up from 1959, where it says Calgary correspondent joins Jewish Post.
there you go. That was very prevalent in those times.
Okay, so who was that? Okay, you'll have to look at that picture to find out who the Calgary correspondent was.
So how long are you going to do this, Bernie? I mean, it's just a one-man show and pretty much.
Well, look, I'll be honest about this. I didn't expect. Oh, there it is. Okay, can we see what her name was?
Yeah, talking Robert Gelfand. It's Mrs.
This is
Tanya.
Robert. Oh, she has to have her husband's name in to introduce her. Isn't that just typical? Yeah.
I should tell you as an aside, the picture beside her is Mrs. Marcus Tessler, who later went on to become Mrs. Dave Korn of the Western Jewish.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah,
Well, we still ran her picture, even though she married to the competitor.
that is correct.
We didn't really anticipate that. I think looking back, we might have taken that picture out. Anyway, you asked me how much longer I'm going to do this. Look, we're in a pandemic right now, and this is keeping me busy, much to my wife's chagrin. I'm holed up in my basement for hours on end, but I enjoy it right now because I'm not going to get out there. I'm not going to the Rady Center. I'm not doing the usual kind of stuff that I would be doing, and nor is anyone else, I imagine. So this is really keeping me busy. But, there's Brian Borzakowski. Okay. All right. I'll have to look at him. Brian, by the way, is the chair now of the new Canadian Jewish News, a Winnipegger, taking over a Toronto entity. Can you imagine that?
Very unusual.
Yeah. What did Brian ask? There are a lot of, maybe we should just be looking at the chats and seeing what I've been busy gabbing away as I want to. Okay, it's shrinking. Okay, if anyone can see that, given that it's shrinking or has shrunken, meters can, why should someone buy the paper? Look, I'll be very honest. I've approached the Winnipeg Free Press. The Winnipeg Free Press is printing our paper through their satellite publication in Steinbach, and the finest printing quality imaginable, by the way. Dirksen Printers, a shout out to them. And the Free Press is delivering our paper. So back in the fall, I approached someone at the Free Press and I said, look, you're printing our paper, you're delivering our paper. What would you think about taking over the paper? And I said, I don't need you to buy the paper. I would just give it to you if you can ensure that it will continue. And they said, okay, on one condition, you find a replacement for yourself. And I did put the word out. So Brian, if you're listening and if you know someone, I don't think you want to do this. Do you want to give up your gig on CNBC? No, it's hard. It would be hard to find someone who could do a lot of what I'm doing, but it's not impossible. And this paper makes good money. Everyone thinks, Jewish newspaper? No. Of course, I'm doing everything, but I mean, I could continue doing this for as long as my health remains. And it's actually come as a total shock to me that it's doing as well as it did. Okay, there's a plug for Brian. Yeah, Brian, if you're listening, I see that you're going to be producing some kind of publication in April for the Canadian Jewish News. Is that right? Maybe just respond.
Can I talk, or can you hear me?
Yeah, Brian. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Hey, first of all, Bernie, this is fantastic. I love the history, so I'm glad I tuned in and heard all of that. It's great. We're putting out a magazine before Pesach and another one hopefully before Rosh Hashanah. So we still got a little bit of a print. We are putting out a new website in April. So I get the Facebook comment, but hopefully that will change, or that'll be just part of our lineup of things. And love to find ways to partner with the Jewish Post. So we should talk.
Yeah, Brian, you haven't paid for your subscription, by the way.
I know. I feel guilty about listening.
No one's listening. You
I'm
can
doing
give me
that
a credit card now, Brian. I've got to think about the money, but I'll see you after. Okay.
Bernie, let me pose, is that?
Okay.
Yeah, that's,
Can you read the question, Jerry?
somebody says, well, I guess that's from, is that from Bernie, given that the Jewish population is.
No, that was Brian.
Oh, that's-
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
That's us repeating ourselves. That's what we do.
Somebody wants to know if.
There are a bunch of questions. I can't see.
Do you have any funny stories about someone you were investigating who did not want to be investigated?
Well, are you referring to something specific that I may not be thinking of?
No, I'm referring to a question that somebody posed. I don't know of any situation like that.
Oh, look, I did write about the National Council of Jewish Women, and when the Gwen Sector Center was about to be sold or closed down, and I thought there was a story behind the story, and I wrote about it, and I was making suggestions, and people were saying, don't go there. Enough about writing about the National Council of Jewish Women, which had got into trouble earlier for some financial shenanigans. And, there are a lot of Jewish organizations that, look, when it comes to things, there was one synagogue that got into trouble for dipping into cemetery funds to sustain a synagogue. But we're a close-knit community. To what extent can you really start? We do write about this to a certain extent, and it's not because I'm afraid of losing advertising, which is people always accuse me of. They say, oh, you weren't writing about that because you're afraid of losing advertising. That's not the reason. The reason is sometimes I actually do a lot of stuff behind closed doors. I approach people. I get a lot of people asking me, will you get involved in this? And I'll contact someone, and I'll try and serve as an intermediary. It's one of the new roles that comes with age and stupidity, I suppose.
Well, we won't say which comes first. So let me ask you, and this is a little broader question, but is there a future in the publishing industry? I mean, can newspapers even make it anymore? I mean, is it over in the next 10 years for the newspaper industry? Are we just going to be reading all electronically?
Well, let's ask the people out there. I don't know to what extent newspapers have a future. It's obviously something that's tied to an older generation that grew up with newspapers. We have a fair number of readers in their 40s and up. I can't think of any in their 30s, except people tell me they read it just like the old days. I read it at my parents' home. We get a lot of people who say we saw our paper in an office. A lot of offices where we'll send the paper during a Jewish holiday. People say, oh, we saw the paper, and they'll write letters to the editor. People are quite aware of us. That's one thing. Now, will the newspapers in general have a future? Look, newspapers are in terrible trouble generally because the pandemic was kind of a death knell for a lot of newspapers. Jewish newspapers, well, in Britain they folded. The Arizona Jewish Post just folded. I don't know how many other Jewish newspapers. The Ottawa Jewish paper, which was run by the Ottawa Jewish Federation. And I talked to a former employee of that newspaper. It was actually doing well. So it's not quite clear to me why the Ottawa Jewish Federation closed that paper. But there seems to be kind of an aversion to print. People think you've got to be online or else you're passé. I'm not trying to be a troglodyte here. That's a big word. But I grew up reading newspapers. I read newspapers online now. I read the Free Press online. I don't like it. I get the Winnipeg Sun in print. It takes 5 minutes to read, but I prefer that. I prefer the print product.
Well, maybe you got to sell them the business model of the in memoriams.
You know, the Alberta Jewish paper approached me a couple years ago, someone from there, and said, how can we start getting memoriams the way you do? And I said to him, start running them for free. Make them up. You know, get some people, put some together, start putting them in the paper, and maybe people will start to think of it. They tried. I don't know whether, I see their paper, I haven't seen any. You know, it's a Winnipeg custom. I believe what was it, Leventhal, who wrote the book on Jewish newspapers, he referred to the quaint tradition. And this is back in the 1970s, he wrote about the quaint tradition of the Jewish Post of having memoriams when no other newspaper did. But it's grown.
Well, of course, you also have, let's not forget, before, I think I don't want to miss it. So you do have articles, and quite a few of them, from on Israel and people even writing from Israel, and that's an important part of the newspaper.
Well, to be perfectly honest, and this is where the website comes in handy, it gives me an idea of how popular certain articles are. Jerry, your column is immensely popular. And I've said this before, the columns or the articles that draw the most attention are ones where we talk about a sudden tragedy. Now, that's typical of any newspaper, when something takes people by surprise and takes their breath away. When they hear of a young person dying, for instance, those articles really, now, we can't seek those out. But when it comes to reporting on Israel, my thinking is that most people can get all the news they need online about Israel. I look for interesting takes on Israel. You know, I'll run columns that might go against the grain, the accepted wisdom. I'll run columns that are very critical of Israel, just to show that there's a balance in our paper. I'll run Myron Love's absolutely. They're so over the top in defense of Israel that I have to think there has to be another point of view that we have to present. But I run Myron's column unquestioningly, his opinion piece. I run other columns that are highly opposed and critical of what I'll put in the paper. I'm not afraid to take criticism. As a matter of fact, I often criticize myself in the paper.
No, you're one that's promoted controversy. If anything, that's probably one of the things that you're known for, is that you're not afraid to take a controversial position, and you're not afraid to sort of create the controversy.
Well, I didn't say anything about you, Jerry. I've held my tongue.
Well, let's keep going. I'm sure we'll get there. No, I think unless you have anything pressing, Bill, that you want to spring, I think we should wrap it up here. And I want to thank you, Bernie. You're, as I expected. I knew this would work well. I just had to let you run.
Jerry, Mark Cantor here. I wonder if I could just ask a question of Bernie.
Go ahead.
Bernie, you've covered a lot of, the Jewish Heritage Center has the annual Saul and Florence Caney Lecture Series or Distinguished Speaker Series. I'm sure you've heard a lot of other lecturers or distinguished speakers. I'm always impressed with your coverage of those lectures. Quite impressed with your note-taking. You tend to be very detailed in your coverage of those. Is there anyone that stands out for you in your years of covering various lectures and speakers?
You've had some great speakers. I'm trying to think offhand. You kind of caught me by surprise. There was the former head of the Mossad. It wasn't that he was so, or the Macmillan. Her first name is
Margaret
Macmillan. She was fantastic. Yeah. She was about 4 years ago, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you've had top-notch speakers. My brother took shorthand, and he kept all his notebooks over the years, all his shorthand notebooks, and he was an immaculate note-taker. My note-taking comes from university experience, trying to get the gist of what a speaker says. If it's really hard though when you concentrate. You're listening to a speaker, they've said something really memorable, you write it down, you're concentrating on what they said, and then you miss the next part of what they said. It's easy to take out a recorder and record everything, but then I do that now more often than I used to, because I really try to capture the flavor of speakers. And what I also do in most cases, and I think a lot of reporters would give me hell for this, I send a draft of what I've written to the speaker if I can contact them to make sure that I've got it right. Because I know Belle can tell you that we've had occasions in our paper when she has been misquoted and takes great umbrage at that. Not with me, Belle, with the other writers, right? Okay. But, it's important to get it right. And I think that when you have a speaker who's prepared a text, or even if they're speaking off the cuff, you want to be able to quote them accurately. Most newspaper reporters would do that, but you also want to put what they've said in the proper context. That's why when I report on a Caney lecture, it'll be a long article. I don't think you can capture it in just 500 words. It has to be 1,500 words minimum.
Well, thank you for your coverage of those, and it's very impressive the way you were able to write in such detail. But on other things as well, of course. But no, I've always been impressed with that. I'm sorry, Jerry, I interrupted you.
It's okay. No, Bernie Listen has always been, in my view, a very strong supporter of the Jewish Heritage Center, and that's part of it.
Yeah.
No, Bernie, I do want to thank you. It's been a treat to listen to you. You, as I say, and I don't mean this idly, the fact is, probably more than anyone in the community, you know what's going on in the Winnipeg Jewish community, and individually and in the organizational way, because you're on top of it, and it's fascinating to listen to, and I want to thank you for doing this.
Okay, I don't know how who's going to wrap this up?
Bernie. And if I can cut in now,
words.
I will thank Jerry and Bernie for a wonderful conversation. It's just as good as the one we had at coffee several months ago, when it was actually possible to sit at a table. I guess it was more than several months ago. We were sitting at a table and we were actually talking about putting this program together. That was a great conversation now, and it was a great conversation today, and I hope we'll have many more.
By the way, Dan, can I interrupt? This is going to be available for people to see if they haven't seen it, isn't it? Is this being recorded?
Belle,
wasn't it going to be recorded?
Yes, it is, and it will go up on the Jewish Heritage Center's YouTube channel as soon as it's ready.
Yeah, you let me know, and I'll put it in the Jewish Post News, just in case people haven't got enough of me. They can get me again.
Everything you wanted to know about Bernie Bell.
And I think we can see why. One of the reasons why the Jewish Post is doing so well, because Bernie runs it, and he runs it very well, and keeps it interesting, and actually reports on what people say. And here I'll give him some assignments. Greg, if you would put up that list. We have some upcoming programs, and here's our assignment for Bernie for the next little while. Not long from now.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, by the way, the Jewish Heritage Center has I've made a deal with a lot of organizations during the pandemic. There was no cost for their publicity in the paper. I considered our mandate to publicize all these sorts of events. And if anyone listening now and they're a member of an organization and they thought they would have to pay for publicity, if you're not charging, or even if you are charging a small amount, you'll get publicity for free in our paper.
Thank you, Bernie. We very much appreciate it. And we'll be very, very happy. Also, we'll be very happy to pay you when this is all over. So, in early April, as you can see on the list, there's a conversation between Belle Jarniewski, who did so much of the work in organizing this session, and author Judy Battalion, who's the author of a book called The Untold Story of Women Resistance Fighters in Hitler's Ghetto. followed immediately by the Megillat HaShoah, interfaith reading of the Holocaust scroll. Then you have a couple of weeks off till we have a program on chess in Winnipeg, the Jewish Gambit, with Cecil Rossner, whom everybody knows is a chess columnist, and Erwin Lipnowski, economics professor and a ranked chess master. Then I have the wrong date here. I'm sorry, it's May 30th. I apologize especially to Irene Karschenbaum, who gave a question here today. A little synagogue on the prairie. There's a little synagogue from a rural town that was moved to the Calgary Heritage Park, and Irene Karschenbaum was one of the main organizers, perhaps the main organizer of that, and she will tell us about it. This is one of the few things that Zoom has done for us. It's allowed us to reach out beyond Winnipeg. Then, so please be careful. I have carelessly put the wrong date on this, so it's May 30th. Any lecture, we have a series this year. It's impossible to get together, but we have some fine speakers. April 25th, Bell's colleagues from the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance on the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, which has been debated in the Jewish Post by some readers. And representatives from the World Jewish Congress, from Belgium, Australia, and Germany all together. Watch for it. May, we don't have a date yet, Erwin Kotler and Bob Ray, known to all of you, I'm sure, on human rights around the world. And June, one of the speakers that Bernie mentioned, Ephraim Halevi, former director of Mossad, will be and 2012 Caney lecturer, will be talking about the Middle Eastern region after the pandemic. So all we have now, unfortunately, is to wind this up, to thank especially Bernie and Jerry for this wonderful conversation, to thank the people who put it together, Bel Janevsky, Stan Carbone, Andrew Morrison, the archivist, who helped get some of these pictures out, Greg Mardero, who has done technical work, and thank the audience for joining us tonight. And we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you all, and good night.